Hello everyone, my name is Piers Ridyard, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a roundtable with Jeremy and Adam, where we're going to be asking one of those questions that I think everyone has, which is why are users and capital actually going to choose Radix? So Jeremy, let's start off with this idea, like DeFi is already making some inroads into users. Why do you think that users are going to be more comfortable on Radix than they are on other networks?
I mean, Piers, anyone who's been in DeFi or crypto for more than about a day knows how difficult it is just to set up a wallet and the stress that comes with it. I mean, the day when my mom uses seed words is like the beginning of the end of society, right? It's never going to happen. So just as there's difficulties of securing your account, of putting transactions, of not knowing what's going to happen, we solve those problems. And I think that that's going to reduce the friction. I know that's going to reduce the friction for people as they want to onboard to Web3. That's going to be a game changer.
But why do you think that's so big? What? I think that people in DeFi are just like, well, it's just part of being in crypto. Like your seed phrases as being part of being in crypto. Like not your keys, not your crypto is a thing that we hear all of the time. Like why are we so sure that this is like that much better?
Because you think about the adoption curve. Everyone you're talking about is way out on the edge of the early adopter curve.
Right.
You need to cross that proverbial chasm, and that means you need to change the user experience and change the paradigm for the user. What MetaMask did was a tremendous boon for the industry in the early days for that audience. But to get into that next mainstream part, you have to change that experience. The current experience is just not good enough. It's too many hassles, too many barriers. Most people aren't going to do it.
And even if you are already doing it, like who wants to have the hassle of, if you're backing up your seed phrase, I mean, like, what if my house burns down? Where's a safe place? Oh, I need to have it somewhere else now, but what, is that a safe place to have it? Oh, I'll back it up on Metal. You've got all of these things that you just don't want to be thinking about.
Right.
But you do want to make sure you've got your money safe.
Right, and you want to, and it's this constant choice in the crypto space has been between you look after your own keys, and then you take the responsibility if you're, if you lose it or you write it down wrong or whatever, or you trust a centralized third party, like a custodian or an exchange, and we've seen how well that's happened, recently. So, like, what is it that you think the account model, like, why do you think the account model is so interesting on Radix?
So, a big thing for me is with smart accounts, other than being able to securely and decentralized backup of your system if you lose your phone or something like that, is having different security on different accounts. So what I love from, as Matt explains it, like being able to tap your YubiKey if you're doing a higher value transaction and being able to set that yourself. Because for me, I may have a very different tolerance to what I want to be able to conveniently spend versus securely spend to Jeremy. And a one size fits all isn't going to work for everybody.
Right.
It's not even that. I mean, my personal favorite component or element of the user experience is the transaction manifest.
Right.
I mean, that stuff, when I saw that the first time, and I was like, oh my God, like everybody in crypto and everybody not in crypto is going to want this, because you know how much stress there is when you're like, I'm going to Uniswap and I'm going to accept these approvals or give these approvals, and I can't really read because I don't know what the nonce means or whatever, and I'm just going to sign it and I'm going to get back the money that I put in. I mean, that's like someone said to me, that's like putting all your items in the shopping cart and clicking buy without actually having a chance to review your order. Like, that's unacceptable.
Right, it's sort of terrifying. And I think that actually the thing that people are sort of under realizing for institutional capital to come in, for sophisticated capital to come in, is if you are a sophisticated, if you're actually managing your capital in a professional way, you need all of these rules associated with how you spend, and like you have to be able to say, okay, this entity, this signer, this person is able to set up a transaction, but they can't complete it unless 2 more people have signed. Now, so far we do that via custody rules, but on Radix you now have this ability to program them into the account itself. So it's all decentralized, it's all on ledger. This ability to program whatever rules you want around spending can actually start to more closely resemble what you see in institutional sort of sophisticated investor portfolios as well, and how to properly manage capital. But now, not only that, but individual users can have that as well. This idea of like, if I die, I can have a signer as my lawyer, but make sure that, only if I die will my lawyer ever do anything with my account. And this idea of, estate planning and all those kind of things suddenly possible. Now you have this account model, which I think is so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting the benefits of not your keys, not your crypto, but with a whole bunch of level of assurances and comfort and a feel and almost serenity, because right now it's just nerve-wracking. I mean, the number of people in crypto, we've read all kinds of stories of people who've died and no one knew where their keys were, or like you care about your offspring and whatever you want to do with it. Like that's stressful. You don't want that. No one's going to do that.
There's even simple things though, like if I want to buy a ticket with you, for example, not having to deal with that logistics thing that you do today of like, oh, I'll buy them, you send me the money afterwards, now you can't go. To be like, Piers, I'm going to this, do you want a ticket as well? And it doesn't go through unless we're both going to go. Like, I mean, you're relatively well organized, so I trust you for that. But I have some friends who I really wouldn't do that with, let alone like 10 or 20 of them. Anyone who's arranged a stag do will know that feeling.
My friends are watching this and like, Piers is not that organized. So like, let's talk about this from the point of view of apps, right? Like DApps already exist on things like Ethereum and other layer 1 protocols. Like why do we think that there's going to be like better DApps on Radix? Do we think that there's going to be better DApps on Radix?
There's definitely. Like
I don't think it. I know it. There's no thinking involved here. I mean, the best thing is that what I think made us all fall in love with Web3 and crypto, blockchain, whatever you want to call it, is that we realize that this concept of a public distributed ledger makes things that were previously impossible now possible. And what Radix does is makes things that were previously impractical to build on other platforms practical. So there are all these developers around the world. What do we know? Like 27 million developers around the world, 20,000 in Web3, so 26,980,000 that aren't yet in Web3. And many of them that was some good math there, right? Many of them have hit the wall and said, this is too freaking difficult for me. But when they see how easy it is to develop with Scripto and the Radix engine, they're going to start coming up with things that we can't even imagine now. And all these other people who've had visions of, I could do this in DeFi, but they ran into the cold, hard reality of, I can't do it on this platform. And I've met, developers from financial institutions who understand how messed up, TradFi is, and they see the opportunity to disintermediate, and they're like, I can't build an enterprise-grade system on this. But they've played around with Scripto. They've seen the Radix engine. They understand how great the potential is for Cerberus to leverage. And they're like, dude, this is a platform I can build on. So you're going to see a whole wealth of things come out.
And for me, it's the game engine analogy is the perfect analogy of this for me. Like, if you were the guy who made Roller Coaster Tycoon, programmed it all in assembly, and you're like, I love this story. And it's like,
he loves this story. But it's a good story.
He's a genius. And it's like, yes, you can go and do that, but 99.9% of people can't. And it's not about making the impossible possible. It's about making things you can imagine intuitive and secure when you're doing it. Because I know a lot of developers who looked at me like, I want to build something cool in DeFi, but I want to be able to sleep at night. I don't want to be sitting there going, what if my smart contract gets hacked? What if I lose all my user funds? Not even from just a financial perspective, but from an ethical perspective. They're like, it's not secure enough for me. I don't want to take that step.
I think people don't really appreciate the difference between possible and feasible. And like, I think that often in Ethereum, you can say, well, of course you can do everything with Solidity. It is Turing complete. You can do anything, realistically speaking, with Solidity. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be unfeasibly expensive or unfeasibly difficult or really difficult to secure. And I think that gap, but like, why is that going to matter to users and capital? What's that got to do with that?
More choice ultimately.
More choice of what?
Of applications that you can go and put your capital into, what you can go and utilize.
But why is that going to happen?
Ultimately, developers are going to be building things where they think they can attract capital into it. And the more easily the users can get into those positions because of a great user experience that we have with Radix Wallet, more can get onboarded quicker. But also, you then start getting more personalized solutions. So you see this with things like, in my opinion, the App Store on your phone. In the early days, there was only a few apps. There wasn't much choice. There wasn't much competition between them. And then suddenly there was this explosion where people started building way more apps. And I think we'll see the same thing with DApps if you get that barrier to entry far lower. And as a user, that's great, because then suddenly you may be using 5 of the same DApps that you are. But there could be one that I'm like, this does exactly what I want it to do. This weird thing that only I really care about, a couple of people care about. But for us, it's hugely beneficial.
Right.
That's commercially viable then for a developer to go and do that
Right.
if it's easy and secure to build.
Right.
And it's great for me as a user because I then have more choice of what I want to go
and more like comfort, right?
Definitely.
Because I think that a lot of this is a lot of people don't use DeFi for I think two main reasons. Like one is the things they want aren't there yet.
Right.
And it's really difficult to access them when they do. But the other is that you see the headlines, right?
Right.
Right? You just see the headlines and you're like, man, like
Nightmare.
that looks like a good yield,
Yeah.
but holy crap, like
Right.
it could just disappear in an instant.
Right. Right.
So like, do you think the hacks and exploits, sort of there being less types of hacks and exploits possible, is going to lead to sort of more capital coming in as well?
Absolutely. I mean, as your confidence and the inherent believability of the security and integrity of the system increases, that's going to bring in additional waves of capital. And not only will they be attracted to new, previously impractical or unfeasible experiences, but they're going to be able to see the experiences that exist in sort of their demo form now in DeFi really brought to sort of production grade, supercharged, added a whole bunch of new capabilities that you're like, wow, it's lending, but it's like really solid, or it's bar or whatever it is. You're going to be able to do that. And you know what I say to people is like, don't take it from us. We obviously have skin in the game. Go look at our ecosystem. Go look at all the people who've already built applications before we even have our smart contracts live. That's insane. I mean, there are 132 different projects right now sitting on Radix, and they're probably who knows how many sitting in development because people are waiting for that day when they can just roll out and own a piece of the market when they're the first ones in the marketplace.
Well, I've personally spoken to multiple people in the Radix developer community who are like, I've got this really cool thing. And I'm like, cool, can we give you some promotion? Can we start talking about this? And they're like, could you wait a bit? Because we don't want to reveal our really cool thing yet. And that feels so special, so special. But those same people are still in our developer community, talking to others, sharing ideas, coming up with all the cool things that they want to build. And because it's so intuitive to do so, they see a path to building it.
Yeah.
And it's that electric excitement that and as a user, that carries forward because you're like, that sounds really cool what they're talking about. I'd love to try that. And ties back into like the full stack. You know that when you're trying it, simple things like seeing the transaction manifest in your wallet when you approve, you actually know what's happening. So even if it's something you don't completely know how it works or what's going to see the steps, you're like, well, I can see exactly what's going to happen and what I'm going to get back, which ties back into being comfortable as a user and confident as a user to use my assets and my money on a Web3 environment.
Yeah. And to have it in plain English. Like, it's like we've been doing this for so long, we're so used to the fact that it's in like, some sort of we know it's a cryptographic hash and we feel good about that, but very few people actually know. I mean, I remember I was doing a transaction once. I don't remember exactly which DeFi protocol it was, but it failed for some reason. And so I sent a tweet to the team and I said, I don't understand why this failed. And someone wrote back to me like, oh, you should just use a different RPC. And I'm like, dude, I've been in crypto for 6 years. I'm not 100% sure even what that means. And even if I were, I wouldn't know what to do. Like, that's your support answer? Come on, man. That's never going to go mainstream.
But I mean, it's still like that early days of the internet, right?
Totally.
When, like Usenet and stuff like that. And people are so deep into it. I continually forget how deep I am.
Right.
And like what is so refreshing is those user conversations. But it's interesting you talked about this idea of supercharging the applications that exist on other layer ones when they build the same thing, like Uniswap on Radix or Aave on Radix. Some of the user testing that we did, so we did this thing called GoodFi, where we were like, let's work out the best way of getting the next 100 million people to put $1 into DeFi, because we were like, look, this is like the early days of the internet. The win wasn't getting people to spend 8 hours a day on the internet. The win was getting them connected for the first time. Because you've got to convince someone to connect internet to their house, to learn this new thing called a browser, to get a computer to be able to do it. So getting the first $1 in, that was the thing. So we did some user testing around that. We did some like focus groups. And what was really interesting is even for existing DeFi, the amount of fallout of the funnel, the amount of attrition that you got out of the funnel from someone going, I'm interested in this yield, to like 4 hours later, having gone through exchanges and MetaMask and ledgers and like then connecting like a Web3 application and then getting in, like the amount that you get fall out of the funnel. And so it isn't just about being able to create better versions of the same thing. It's also about reducing the friction in the top of your funnel coming in as well. I think that's a really key thing that we don't see. Especially when the times are good. Like you can have fall out of the funnel when things are like, when things are hypey and everyone's like, oh my God, we got to get in. But like when it becomes to the real user acquisition, the kind of things that applications, Web2 applications are used to, this is the stuff that matters.
Well, I think there's an important part baked in that, which is not only the acquisition, but the retention. Right? And it's obvious in some ways, but especially when you're in an early product. I mean, as a marketer, like the only thing I think about is, word of mouth, right? Like that's the single most effective, it's not the only thing about, it's my primary thing I think about, right? It's how do you foster and encourage word of mouth? Well, if more and more people are dropping out of the experience, for every one of those, that's 10 people who are automatically not going to hear about it. And you've just increased your customer acquisition costs, you've increased your time to product market fit, and it's just very difficult. So the fact that the Radix wallet experience is going to retain more people from start to finish, is going to have amplification effects in terms of customer acquisition.
And it's not just from customer acquisition either. The thing I always remember is in DeFi summer, I was saying like some friends were interested and they're like, oh, Adam, could I give this a go? And sitting there being like, well, actually you can't really. And it comes back to choice because like, you probably don't want to be putting in like 4 or 5 figures into this. And if you're not doing that, then your gas fee or that is going to be so high that you can't go and test it out. It's like ape in with a couple of grand minimum or you're going to lose all profit you'll have on that. Which as a user, that really sucks because you're like, well, I just want to try it. I just want to put a bit here, a bit there, everywhere. And if you can't, then you feel trapped into far fewer things. And on the developer side, you have far fewer potential customers.
Well, and to on to that point, it's not only that the barriers were so high in terms of money. It goes against the principles of crypto in terms of making it more accessible to more people. And, like now when we have that less friction, you can bring more people, start giving them that experience, the stories we've heard from places like Lebanon and Cyprus, all these places that Argentina, the list goes on, of people who want access but are run into those barriers. Like that's just on a humanitarian level unfair. And so this is actually not only just going to help people who already have money, but it's going to help people who have less money start to do more and feel more empowered and be more empowered.
Right. I think like that idea of opening up the world to, people talk about banking the unbanked, but actually a lot of people don't talk about the underserviced, like people sometimes say underbanked. But the underserviced sector of humanity, which actually continues to create that gap, that divide between people who are able to earn a return on what they have versus people who aren't. Like, yes, you may be able to save it, but not actually get access to the things that can mean that you can grow your wealth and make your money work for you. And I think that's actually a hidden cost to the way the banking system, to the way the investment systems currently work.
And that's not solved at one layer either. And that's what really excites me about the approach we're taking with Radix and the full stack is you can solve one of those things. Go, okay, fees are lower now. It's like, great, but I still don't understand how to set up my MetaMask account, get assets in there, connect to a DApp or anything like that. You can fix the other layer and it's like, great, I can use this really easily. But if it costs me $100 in gas fees just to make one simple swap, that's economically unviable for the vast majority of people.
Yes. And that last bit of just being like, yes, you should come here and put your life savings here or put a decent proportion of your wealth here. But oh, by the way, if you lose the private key, sorry, that's your problem. Like, that's your fault.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that narrative has come in because that until sort of the Radix account model has actually been possible as like a fundamental component of a public ledger, that had to be the narrative. So I think that change where you can still create decentralized custody, but with more flexibility in terms of recovery, in terms of multi-factor, in terms of all of these things that actually make these things feel like you can be a human with it. I can lose my phone. I can lose my computer. That's not actually.
It's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world.
I mean, the only thing I'd say, just to tap onto that, the other thing that gets me excited is that from day one, we have refused to compromise on atomic composability.
Right.
And I mean, that's one of the things that made me fall in love with Radix, right? Helped me with my own Radix revelation, as it were.
Right.
But I think when you bring people on and they have the opportunities to move their capital, no matter how much capital we're talking about, from one place to the other, and have all of these things interconnected and building new experiences that help people get the most for the money for whatever their personal goals are.
Right.
Like, honestly, man, that's the part I'm most excited about.
So let's last topic, I think, let's talk a little bit about regulation, right? I think that regulation has been coming for a while. There's obviously MiCA and like the FATF regulations and sort of the VASP stuff. That's all coming in. And then that narrative has now been accelerated by things like the Luna collapse, with FTX blow up, with Celsius, all of these kind of things. I think at the moment there's, just before we talk about sort of the Radix approach, I think there is this problem where regulation is kind of lumping these two things together. Things like centralized, things like Celsius or like Three Arrows or like FTX, versus what can happen if you have full transparency and self-custody on top of public ledgers, which is going to be a really important thing for the industry to make sure that that narrative comes through. And obviously we're going to have to be part of that. But from the point of view of regulatory compliance, how do you think about, how do you see Radix sort of approaching that? And do you think that's the right approach? So
right from the start, I've been really pleased with the approach Radix is taking with it, of being prepared for what could be coming down the line. Because I think there's no world where there won't be some form of regulation about DeFi, because there is consumer protection concerns in any industry. So there will be these questions asked. And it's about, in my opinion, answering those questions and giving the input to people on how do we find a solution solving the actual problem you want to solve, rather than necessarily just copying what happened in centralized finance, TradFi, and just trying to apply that, because the technology is different. And it's not a new problem. When the internet came around and you had like social media giants, like, are they a platform? Are they a publisher? Well, what we're seeing now is maybe there's something in the middle and we don't really know what it is, and neither rule set is perfect. And this is going to be an education piece. It's going to take some time, but I personally believe that we're in a really good position as Radix of knowing that's coming down the line and making sure that things we're doing today are prepared for those potential things so that we can still thrive when they come in.
It's not even things we've been doing today. I mean, I think the thing that makes Radix so special among every single smart contract platform is we're the only ones that started from the point of how do you decentralize $400 trillion global finance system and worked backwards. And from day one, we've been focusing on that goal from our tech perspective, from the entire stack, everything. But that includes regulation. We knew that this day was coming. So yes, it's what we're doing today, but it's what we've been doing for the last couple years, saying we have to dot our I's, we have to cross our T's. And sometimes our community, best community in my opinion in all of crypto, will sort of poke fun at us like, oh, you have to check with the lawyers, you have to check the lawyers. There's a reason we were doing that from day one, is because we knew if for $400 trillion to sit on one decentralized public ledger, that's not going to be all retail. And the institutions are going to need those assurances. Wherever those boundaries for DeFi and TradFi are laid, they're going to need those assurances. And the good news is we're ready for when that day comes.
Yeah, I think that the truth of all of this is that a public ledger, there's a good reason. I mean, I think the strongest of reasons for wanting the infrastructure itself to be decentralized, because the infrastructure itself is a public good. It's something that you want to be supranational. You want it to be neutral. But that doesn't mean that anything you build on top of it can't have a set of strongly bound rules around how that is. Like if you want accredited investors, if you want to make sure that only sort of KYC AML compliant applications are working within certain parameters on top of the ledger, if you want any kind of rule set associated with the issuance of that you do, we've made all of those things as easy as possible so that you can design for the whole range. I think that permissionless systems are incredibly important, not just for this idea of being able to avoid arbitrary sort of suppression that can sometimes happen, but also as test beds for being able to test things out. But you also have to face the fact that if you want institutional capital to come in, there has to be the ways in which you can create compliant areas on top of ledgers as well. And if you look at how we've done our resources and permissions, how we've done our badges, how we've done the concept of assets and made sure that all of these things can be baked in, why all of that has been baked in all the way down to the consensus itself, you can see why that design has been all part of the philosophy about permissionlessness and decentralization, for resiliency, but about also recognizing the fact that it's important that you can comply with regulation, that you can make sure that those things can be possible as well.
There's also ways which we're doing some quite innovative things. So personas, for example, in the Radix wallet, like it's a way, digital identity is going to be massive. And today we're already seeing problems of trusting centralized entities like the social media giants with all of our personal data. Personas give users the choice of who they share with, how they share with it. And there are times when you need to share that information, all the way through to things such as like Instapass and what they're doing for KYC verification and stuff like that. There is going to be a need for that, as you say, with institutional money, all the way down to users wanting to just share certain information with certain DApps to get certain benefits. And those are really exciting things for me, because it's areas that are unknown. It's like when you zoom out from this little starter area DeFi's in now, zoom out to the big picture, like there's this whole universe that we haven't even started to explore yet. And these are the things that, in my opinion, is why users are going to come flooding into the network.
Yeah, I think ultimately the whole approach of Radix has been not necessarily having a opinion. It's just about creating the tools. It's like there is a set of requirements. How do we make sure that we understand the tools we're creating are going to fit those requirements? I think that's fascinating. Do you guys have anything that you want to sort of like conclude with why you think particularly users and capital are going to be flowing to Radix?
For me, it's really simple. With Radix, I think I could get any of my friends, my colleagues, my family, and be able to get them onboarded in an hour. Whereas I have tried to do that in the past with current Web3. Bless her, my mum has a MetaMask account, but it took her longer than an hour to get her comfortable using that.
You're ahead of me. My mom doesn't even have a MetaMask account. But yeah, I agree. When I saw the Radix wallet, like the light bulb went off, and I was like, yes, this is the bridge that we've needed for a long time. And I think it's just going to be great. And so that creates a virtuous cycle. The more users, capital, and then kind of goes off from there. So now is a great time to be part of this this movement.
So exciting. Jeremy, Adam, thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching.